The moment someone becomes president, a clock starts. Not a countdown to the end of their term, a countdown to the end of who they were. It isn't power that changes them, it's what power costs. The isolation, the decisions, the lies, the identity that slowly swallows the person whole. By the time most presidents leave office, they are not the same person who walked in. This is what the job actually does to them. Number one, the job cuts them off from everyone, and it changes how they see people. The first thing that happens when someone becomes president is so gradual, they don't notice it until it's already done. Everyone around them changes. Not because the people change, because the relationship does. The moment you hold ultimate power, no one in your life can be fully honest with you anymore. Aides soften bad news. Friends stop disagreeing. Advisors tell you what keeps them in the room. Even family members start filtering what they say, because the stakes of getting it wrong are too high. And the president, surrounded by people at all times, becomes completely alone. This has been documented across leaders throughout history. The higher the power, the thicker the wall between the person holding it and honest reality. Historians call it the court dynamic. Psychologists call it the isolation of command. Whatever you call it, the effect is the same. The most powerful person in the world gradually loses access to the one thing they need most, an accurate picture of how things actually are. But here's where it gets darker. The brain adapts to isolation. When genuine human connection becomes rare, when every interaction carries an agenda, every relationship is filtered through hierarchy, the brain starts to change how it reads people. Trust becomes harder to extend. Suspicion becomes the default. Not paranoia exactly, more like a learned wariness that calcifies over time into a permanent way of seeing the world. Former presidents describe it in strikingly similar terms. The sense that genuine warmth became hard to recognize, that they found themselves scanning every interaction for motive, that the version of human connection they once had, easy, unguarded, reciprocal, had quietly become inaccessible. The job doesn't just isolate them from people, it rewires how they experience people. And once that rewiring happens, it doesn't fully reverse when they leave. That's what isolation does. But there's something the job demands of them that goes even further, something the human mind was never designed to carry. Number two, every decision they make gets people killed, and their brain learns to live with it. On the first day in office, a president receives something called the nuclear briefing. They are told, in precise detail, what they now have the authority to do, how many people it would affect, how quickly it could happen, and that the decision, if it ever came, would be theirs alone. Most presidents describe this moment as the one that changes everything, because from that point forward, they carry a weight that has no equivalent in any other human experience. Every significant decision, every military operation, every policy, every crisis response, has a body count attached to it. People will live or die based on calls made in rooms most of the world will never see. No civilian framework prepares a human being for this, and so the brain does what it always does when confronted with something it cannot process. It adapts. It builds distance between the decision and the feeling. It develops the cognitive ability to separate yourself from the human consequences of your actions in order to keep functioning. This isn't coldness. It isn't sociopathy. It is a survival mechanism. A mind that fully felt the weight of every consequence would collapse under it. So the mind learns not to fully feel it. The problem is that the mechanism doesn't discriminate. The same psychological distance that protects a president from paralysis also starts to affect ordinary emotional processing. Empathy doesn't disappear, but it becomes harder to access, harder to feel in real time rather than in retrospect. Former military commanders describe the same pattern. So do surgeons who operate under extreme pressure for decades. The capacity for decisive action and the capacity for deep feeling begin to trade off against each other. The office demands decisiveness above everything else, and the brain delivers, at a cost that only becomes visible later. The decisions hollow something out. But what happens in the rooms around them is almost worse, because it's invisible, and by the time they notice it, it's already too late. Number three, everyone around them starts lying, and they lose the ability to tell. There is a specific kind of lie that surrounds power. It doesn't look like a lie. It looks like loyalty. It sounds like agreement, like enthusiasm, like, "That's a great idea, sir." Like bad news delivered so carefully, so wrapped in qualifications and silver linings, that by the time it reaches the president, it barely resembles the truth it started as. Nobody decides to do this. It happens automatically, across every level of the organization, driven by a simple psychological force. Proximity to power is valuable, and disagreement threatens proximity. So people learn, unconsciously, gradually, to tell the person at the top what keeps them there. Psychologists call this the mum effect, the well-documented human tendency to withhold negative information from people in authority. It exists in every hierarchy. But at the presidential level, where the stakes of displeasing the person in charge are highest and the rewards of pleasing them are greatest, the effect becomes total. What makes this so dangerous is the feedback loop it creates. A president who receives consistently filtered information begins to form a model of reality that doesn't match actual reality. They start making decisions based on that model. When those decisions produce poor outcomes, the information about those outcomes gets filtered too, softened, reframed, delayed. The gap between what the president believes is happening and what is actually happening grows wider. And the wider it grows, the harder it becomes to close. And here is the part that makes it a psychological trap rather than just a management problem. The president usually can't feel it happening because filtered information doesn't feel like filtered information. It feels like being well informed. The absence of bad news doesn't feel like suppression. It feels like good performance. They don't lose touch with reality all at once. They drift from it, slowly, surrounded by people telling them everything is fine. The information problem changes how they see the world. But underneath all of it, something even more fundamental is quietly being taken from them. Number 4. The role takes over until they don't know who they are without it. There is a moment, historians can rarely pinpoint exactly when, where a president stops being a person who holds the office and becomes the office itself. It happens slowly, and it feels from the inside like growth. In the early months, the role is something they wear. They are still themselves, with a job, with enormous responsibility, but recognizably the person they were before. They have a self that exists separately from the title. Then the role starts to expand. Every interaction becomes presidential. Every decision is filtered through what the office requires. The way they walk, speak, think, and process the world gets shaped, day by day, almost imperceptibly, by what the position demands. Their schedule, their relationships, their physical environment, all of it is structured around the role, not around them. And the self, without space to exist independently, begins to shrink. Psychologists who study identity fusion, the process by which a person's individual identity merges with a role, describe what happens at the extreme end of this spectrum. The person no longer experiences the role as something external. It becomes load-bearing, the thing the entire sense of self is built around. For a president, this fusion is almost structurally inevitable. The role is total. 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, for 4 or 8 years. There is no clocking out, no version of Tuesday evening that belongs just to them. The presidency doesn't leave room for a separate self to breathe. And so, eventually, the separate self stops trying. What makes this a psychological trap is what happens when the role ends. Because when it ends completely. One day they are the most powerful person on earth. The next day the calls stop. The motorcade disappears. The decisions, the constant, all-consuming decisions that structured every waking hour, are suddenly someone else's. And the person standing in that silence has to answer a question they haven't had to answer in years. Who am I when I'm not this? For many, there is no ready answer. Because the work of knowing what you value, what you enjoy, who you are outside of function and title, stopped happening somewhere around year 1. The role filled every available space, and now the role is gone. Some former presidents describe the transition as the most psychologically destabilizing experience of their lives. More than the job itself, more than any crisis they faced in office. Because at least during the crisis, they knew exactly who they were. The identity shift is gradual, but there's a side effect of the role that nobody warns them about. Number 5. Time starts to break. Months vanish and years feel like nothing. Ask any former president what surprised them most about the job. Almost all of them say the same thing: how fast it went. Not fast the way a good holiday goes fast the way a fever goes fast. Intense, consuming, disorienting, and then suddenly, over, with large sections you can barely account for. This isn't nostalgia. It happens for a specific psychological reason. The human experience of time is not a clock. It's a memory. The way we perceive how long a period lasted is almost entirely determined by how many distinct, memorable experiences we can recall from it. A week full of new things feels long in retrospect. A week of routine feels like it barely happened. The presidency is, paradoxically, both the most intense experience a human being can have and one of the most cognitively repetitive. The stakes are always extreme, but the structure is relentless and unchanging. Briefings, meetings, decisions. Briefings, meetings, decisions. Day after day, year after year, at a pace that leaves no room for the reflection that converts experience into memory. So the experiences don't stack up the way they should. They blur. The brain, running at full capacity just to keep up with the present moment, never fully processes what's happening into retrievable memory. Months pass, then years. And when former presidents try to recall them, they find stretches of time that feel thin, as if they were there, but not quite present for their own lives. When the nervous system is under sustained, extreme pressure for long periods, the brain shifts into a mode focused entirely on immediate processing. Long-term memory consolidation, the process by which experiences become the story of your life, gets deprioritized. You function, but you don't fully absorb. Former presidents often describe looking at photos from their time in office and feeling strangely disconnected from them, like watching someone else's life. 8 years, 2 terms, the most consequential period of their lives, and in many cases, the least fully remembered. The job takes their time, not just their hours, their actual experience of being alive during those years, and you can't get that back. The time disappears, but nothing prepares them for what happens the moment the job finally ends, and the silence sets in. Number 6. Leaving the job destroys them, because the identity has nowhere to go. The last day in office, a president wakes up as the most powerful person on earth. By midnight, they are a private citizen. No transition prepares a human being for this. Not therapy, not planning, not knowing it's coming for 4 years. Because the knowledge that it will end and the psychological experience of it actually ending are two completely different things. One is information, the other is an earthquake. The morning after Inauguration Day, the phone stops ringing the way it rang before. The staff is gone. The briefings disappear. The decisions stop. And in that silence, something that was held together by the pressure of the role begins to come apart. Psychologists who study identity disruption describe a consistent pattern: disorientation, loss of purpose, difficulty with ordinary decisions that would once have seemed trivial, a feeling of invisibility, a grief that doesn't have a culturally sanctioned name, because from the outside, leaving the presidency looks like relief. But it isn't relief, not for most of them, because what former presidents are grieving is not a job. It is the version of themselves that the job made possible. The person who walked into rooms and changed what happened in them. The person whose judgment shaped history. The person who mattered, structurally, undeniably, just by being present. That person is gone, and the person left behind has to build a life from scratch, in their 60s or 70s, with an identity fused to a role that no longer exists. The ones who maintain something of themselves outside the presidency, a genuine relationship, a creative practice, a sense of self independent of the title, tend to find their footing faster. The ones who gave everything to the role tend to struggle longest. Several former presidents have described the years immediately after leaving office as the darkest of their lives. Not the crises, not the wars, not the impossible decisions made in the middle of the night. The quiet. The ordinary Tuesday morning with nowhere to be and no one waiting on their answer. The job gives them everything: purpose, identity, significance, the feeling of being at the center of something that matters. And then it takes all of it back in a single day. The presidency exacts a heavy toll on those who hold its power. If you found this peek behind the curtain of the presidency thought-provoking, I'd love to hear your take. Leave a comment below with your insights on the human cost of holding the highest office. And if you're curious to explore more angles on the complex realities of power, click the link on the screen to watch my next deep dive. If you enjoy grappling with these weighty topics, consider subscribing to catch all my future uploads.